Look at them go! Isn't it just better to release our lovely feathered friends to the wild, so they can live their perfect life where they belong? Let's see. In order to answer this question, we first need to understand that there is a difference in the environment wherever you live and where budgies originally come from. Are you in a native budgie's homeland like Australia? Or do you live somewhere else in the world where you can't actually find wild budgies? And the next question would be, do you live in a city full of traffic and civilians around? Or do you live in a rural area where you can find a lot of scrublands, woodlands and grasslands? Let's start from the obvious one. If you live in a city, especially a big, large, busy city, in that case it really doesn't matter if it's native or not to budgies. They won't even stand a chance to survive. They would easily starve to death. You see, in the wild, most of their food comes from seeds that are found on the ground. In the city, with artificial roads and streets that were built by us, they won't find any food, and if they did, there are stray cats and dogs that could easily get your bird. The city is an obvious example of where budgies won't stand a chance of surviving. The best chance they got if they quickly find someone who has birds and decided to adopt them and take care of them. But what about if you live in a rural area? Well, if it's not native for budgies, actually they might not find the food they need, even though you would think it resembles their native habitat a lot. And if they did find the food, they need to flourish in your area. Our pet budgies are captive birds for a long period of time, so they probably lack the flying skills a wild budgie needs to maneuver a predator that is trying to attack and eat the poor bird. You know what, just for the sake of the argument, let's say they don't have any predators. The next question would be, is it actually a good thing to release budgies and let them breed in the wild where they can flourish and grow to have a huge flock of budgies in your area where it's not even native to them? You see, the problem with that, if you introduce a non-native species to your place, they might actually have a disastrous effect on the native species you already have in your area. It could be from competing on the same food, and they could actually be better than the species you have in your area. So they either pose a huge risk on the native species or even drive them extinct. This is the exact story how the lionfish invaded the Atlantic Ocean, and now it threatens native fish and the environment in the US Atlantic coastal waters. Which leaves us with the last option. Do you live in a native rural area to budgies where they can actually survive? Should you release your budgies to join the other thousands of budgies happily living in the wild? Well, other than if you actually caught a wild budgie that was hurt and now it feels better, so you want to release the bird to the wild, which is good, then that's great. But other than that, the answer is still no. Well, why not? Don't forget, even if you own budgies in Australia, but they are still captive birds, you didn't get your birds from hunting in the wild, you got them from a pet store or a breeder, which means there is no difference between these pet budgies and any other pet budgie in the world. So, still, why not? Why not release them to join their families in the wild? First off, they are not qualified, they still are not good flyers like the wild ones. But for the sake of the argument, again, let's say they are very good flyers and they can survive in the wild. Well, what about the mutation? Is it the wild green type? Because if it's not, then this budgie won't have a chance to survive. Why? Well, we did a whole video about why all wild budgies are green. So if your budgie isn't green, like the wild ones, then your budgie won't survive. If you need to know more, go watch the video where we talked about it in more details. I'll leave a link in the description for that video. And finally, the moment of truth. You live in Australia. Your budgie is the best flying bird in the whole world. Your budgie's color is exactly like the wild green budgies. Is it finally the answer you were looking for? Are you waiting for me to tell you, yes, go for it, let it fly in the heavens of their native land? Well, unfortunately, the answer is still no. Why? Do you remember when we talked about quarantine and how you always need to quarantine a newly acquired bird before introducing the new bird to your existing ones? Actually, I will leave a link in the description for that video to learn more about quarantine and its importance if you missed that one. Now here's the thing, if you release your budgie to the wild flock, your budgie might introduce new disease to the wild birds, and you don't know if they will survive them or not. Think of it if you want to travel to Thailand. You need to get a couple of shots and vaccines because it's your first time going there. And there are some diseases that you didn't have to get vaccinated from unless you visit there. The same goes with budgies, and even if all the conditions met, it is still a huge risk to introduce a new bird to the wild flock and infect them with some deadly disease they are not ready for. So the answer is always no. You should never release your budgie to the wild. I know some people think this is cruel to keep them captive. Actually, I got quite a bit of comments saying release your birds to the wild, this is animal cruelty. But the reality is far from that, and it is actually cruel to release them in the wild to die. For more about budgies, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you are watching this video from YouTube and hit the bell icon to get notified when the next video is up. Or like the Facebook page if you are watching this video from Facebook.